Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our December Transport Premise program. We are so thankful that you participated with us actively, even given all of the things we've lived through over the last several months. We are pleased this evening to have Dr. Satcher, and you have his bio in front of you, but Dr. Salafu will give us more information on that. I'm also pleased to have Dr. Salafu and Dr. Patu. Dr. Salafu is the chair of medicine here at Downstate. Dr. Patu is the former dean for the School of Medicine, and they are also principal investigators for transport, which is an endowment provided by NIH and which supports our premise series here at Downstate. In addition to that, this evening we have the pleasure of having Dr. Mark Stewart, Dean, Professor and Dean of the School of Graduate Studies, College of Graduate Studies, and Dr. Alan Lewis, who is the Professor and Dean of Health Professions here at Downstate. I am going to, in a moment, turn it over to Dr. Salfu, but prior to that, I wanted to also introduce you to Lakia Maxwell, who joins me at Brooklyn Health Disparity Center. She will be capturing your questions, which can be placed in the chat on your screen. So again, welcome. Thank you so much. And Dr. Salafu, once you turn on your mic, you are on.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Straker. And thank you to the audience. Thank you to the principal investigators. But more importantly, thank you to our guest speaker today, Dr. David Satcher. And I'm going to talk a little bit about him in a minute. I just wanted to acknowledge our president, Dr. Wayne Riley, who is alumnus of Morehouse. I just wanted to throw that in. We are so proud of our president and what he has done for this campus at SUNY Downstate. And also to mention that he's one of the principal investigators for this program. He's a PI of the transport program that allows us to be able to deliver this premise series. So in reality, we actually, crafted the premise series in his name, meaning that the presidential series of, talks that would allow people to come together on a monthly basis to discuss health equity, social justice, and health disparities related issues was one of the things that we wanted to put into the program that would create this forum for everybody. So I want everybody to, relax and, tighten your seat belts. This is one of the most important premise talks that we would ever get this year. And that is because our guest speaker, I don't really know where to start introducing him from. But when you talk about academic medicine, success in academic medicine, success in the political environment, success in philanthropy, success in, fighting for justice, health justice, there is no one person that exemplifies all those characteristics than our own Dr. David Satcher. I think the nation is very proud that he's a son of the United States of America. What he has done is just beyond this one page of description, but I will try my best. And if I miss something, please don't crucify me, okay? Because it's just too many things to talk about him. But if I don't do that, I don't think we'll be doing justice to his accomplishments. And the reason why I want to go through it completely is because it is motivational. The young people in the group have to understand that there are things that we can do, and that the things that we talk about are actually examples of what people have done. And that is the reason why I'm going to go through the whole thing. So Dr. Satcher was born in Anniston, Alabama. He graduated from Morehouse in 1963. I'm just going to joke that I was in diapers at that time. And he subsequently went on to get his MD and PhD degrees in cytogenetics. So he's a scientist, he's a real scientist from the Case Western Reserve University in 1970. He then finished residencies in medicine and fellowships at the Strong Memorial Hospital at the University of Rochester, and also at UCLA and King Drew Medical Center in California. Following that, he started his career as the director of the King Drew Sickle Cell Research Center at the University of California, that's Los Angeles, in 1973, from 1973 to 1979. He actually developed and chaired the King Drew Department of Family Medicine and served as the interim dean of that particular university's postgraduate medical school from 1977 to 79. So he was a founding chair of a department. That is remarkable. Then he served as professor and chairman of the Department of Community Medicine and Family Practice at Morehouse School of Medicine from 1979 to 1982. It was a 4-year period. Then became the president of Meharry. He was president of the entire medical center at Meharry. Meharry Medical College from 1982 to 1993. That's a long time to be president of any university medical center. Talk about 10 years of being president. Then at that point was the highlight of his career when President Bill Clinton tapped him to become the director for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and administrator of the Agency for the Toxic Substances and Disease Registry from 1993 to 1998. So he served in those two positions for 5 years. And then he was then nominated, I think in the second term of Bill Clinton, to become the Surgeon General. And that ended in 2002. But while he was there, he also served as the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services. He was very much involved in things. As a matter of fact, when I was finishing my fellowship, I used to quote Dr. Satcher a lot, especially the Healthy People 2020. I think that document had his name all over that document, Healthy People 20, Healthy People 2000. That was the document. The Healthy People 2000 had his word all over that document. And I gave a lot of lectures on health disparity, and I quoted a lot of those sections as well. And it was just remarkable. But among the things that he actually made an imprint on everybody in the United States was the policies around tobacco, health and mental health, race and ethnicity, suicide prevention, oral health, sexual health, and responsible sexual behavior, youth violence and prevention, obesity. Those were themes and policies that he actually made happen in public life in the United States. And we are so happy and proud about those accomplishments. He's a recipient of many honorary degrees, and I have here at least 18 honorary degrees from different universities. The one that actually attracted my attention is most people, when they have reached the axiom of their professional careers, they retire and then they relax and have a nice day. But that is not what Dr. Satcher did. He actually founded the Satcher Health Leadership Institute at the Morehouse School of Medicine. So he went back to Morehouse to set up this institute. And this institute's mission is to create systemic change at the intersection of policy and equity, which he has been driving for the last 14 years in his private time. He's developed leadership programs, raised more than $12 million in endowments, and worked on groundbreaking research for underserved populations. So today, he's going to be discussing his book. The book is entitled My Quest for Health Equity. If there was anyone who was qualified to describe this topic and have the audience that we have today, there is no other person who could do it better than Dr. Satcher. So we are very curious, we are very anxious to hear what he has to tell us. And I think the young people in the audience would learn a lot from what he has done. And hopefully there would be future avenues for them to also have careers as much as he did in his lifetime. So I want you all to please join me in welcoming Dr. Satcher to this PREMIS series. And I will now open the forum to Dr. David Satcher. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be able to join you and look forward to this discussion. And I hope it will be a discussion and not just me talking at you. I do enough of that. I've done enough of that to last a lifetime. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. This is the book. It's called My Quest for Health Equity. And it's interesting because it's related to Healthy People 2010, Healthy People 2020, all of those 10-year plans that we developed in government and and I had an opportunity to lead in those. Um, I don't know how you feel about working in government. I spent almost 10 years, the 5 years at the CDC, and the years as Surgeon General and Assistant Secretary for Health. So I've had the opportunity to work in government, and I appreciate the opportunity that I've had. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's a struggle, but it's also an opportunity to make a difference and to really challenge the status quo. So I feel very fortunate with the opportunities that I've had in government, as well as the opportunity to provide leadership of historically Black institutions, starting with out at King Drew in 1978, and then the years I spent at Meharry, almost 12 years, and then director of the CDC. So I've been fortunate to have these opportunities to lead, and I've tried to make a difference in terms of those opportunities, because we need a difference. There's no question about that. When I first went out to King Drew in 1972, I was a fellow, and it's interesting because as you heard, I had been at Rochester and Case Western and other places, but what they asked me to do was to have a phone by my bed, and whenever a patient came into the emergency room in a sickle cell crisis, I would come in and treat that patient. That was partly because I think there were only two of us there who had any experience in treating sickle cell crises. But as tough as that kind of job sounds, um, I'm really happy that I had an opportunity to do it. It really led to my being director of one of the first sickle cell research centers in the country out at King Drew. And King Drew had never received a grant from the National Institutes of Health when I went out there. But we got one of the first sickle cell research grants. And for me, that was quite an experience. I was still very young. So before the age of 30, I was director of a major NIH research center. So it was a tremendous opportunity, and I would have a lot more. Um, I appreciated all of those opportunities. I saw them as opportunities to make a difference. I grew up in a family where neither of my parents finished elementary school, but they were outstanding people. We lived on a farm. We raised just about all of our food, and each one of us had a job. They were serious about those jobs. We had to do them, and they checked on us to make sure we did them well. Um, there were 9 of us, and had 2 siblings to die very early. And then, as you probably know the story, I almost died of whooping cough at the age of 2. So coming from this family, understanding what it meant to raise the food that you ate, understanding what it meant to share responsibility with your siblings, and understanding what it meant to take seriously the responsibility to make a difference in life. It could be a long story. I mean, I could tell you about all of the things that we did together. There was a Black physician in Anniston, Alabama. There was only one. And when I became very ill with whooping cough, my dad went to town to solicit Dr. Jackson to come out to the farm and see me. They had already lost 2 children, but Dr. Jackson was a very busy physician. But somehow my dad convinced him to come out there to see me, and he did. He didn't think I would live. He told them that, but he also told them what to do to increase my chance of survival. And I did survive. I think they did what he advised them to do, and they did it well. My mother, I know, stayed up all night many times, trying to make sure that I didn't stop breathing. I've heard this story over and over again, as you can imagine, but I'm grateful for the fact that I survived and that I was given an opportunity to make a difference for other people. Um, there's much more I could say about my childhood, but my first, the first encounter with racism, of course, I guess, was the fact that there was a hospital in Anniston, but they didn't take blacks. So Dr. Jackson, even though he thought I was going to die, he couldn't admit me to the hospital. That was the nature of our lives back in that time in Anniston, Alabama. Uh, I wanted to, after I survived, of course, I wanted to meet Dr. Jackson. You know, in part, I wanted to meet him to thank him for coming out to the farm on his off day and treating me. But I also had a little bit of an attitude. I wanted to show him that despite the fact that he didn't think I was going to survive, I did survive. I never got a chance to meet him. He died, I believe, when I was 4 years of age. So then I started telling everybody I was going to be a doctor like Dr. Jackson. And it was an amazing kind of, because it drove me from that point on forward that Dr. Jackson took care of me. I wanted to take care of a lot of other people and got an opportunity to do that. My family was very special in my life because each one of us had a job to do. We had a farm. I started off taking water to the fields to my sibling, then feeding chickens, I won't go into all that because unless you've been there, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it was my job and everybody had a job. And as my dad used to say, you can't expect what you do not inspect. I don't know where he got that from, but but that's what he said. And he made sure that when we were given something to do, that they inspected it. They were pretty smart people to have not finished elementary school, but they were great parents. Well, I encountered racism early in Anniston, Alabama. I remember I could not wait to buy an ice cream cone. I really couldn't wait. So I saved my money. And when I got a chance to go to town with my brothers, I slipped away from them and went into the drugstore to buy an ice cream cone. And in the drugstore, the lady behind the counter said, "We don't serve blacks in here." And she didn't say blacks, but you know what she said. "We don't serve your kind here." That was quite to be 5 years old and to have somebody tell you that they didn't serve you because you were black was quite an experience for me. And it would stay with me the rest of my life. Understanding this discrimination that took place in so many ways, and understanding that somebody would say, you may have the money, that you saved over a period of time, but we don't serve your kind here. So that would stay with me the rest of my life. If anything, it increased my determination in terms of education. As I said, my parents didn't have an opportunity to get an education, but they encouraged us at every point to do well in school. They visited the school. They went to PTA meetings, and they supported the teachers. I tell you, we wouldn't go home and complain to my parents about the teachers being tough on us, because they would make it very clear that we were expected to obey the teachers and to do what they said. That was my parents' attitude. They respected teachers. And this was important because, it was a segregated society. My teachers were all black up until, all through high school. So I I knew that we had to respect the teachers. I want to skip a little bit and talk about college because I made it through high school, did well, and after a little bit of an effort, I was accepted by Morehouse College. Morehouse was concerned that they never heard of Calhoun County Training School before. And here I was expecting them to accept me. And they finally decided to give me a chance. And they also gave me a tuition scholarship and said I could always have a job to pay room and board. So I went to Morehouse College in 1959. Worked in the library at first. Did well academically through it all. But the turning point sort of came when I was a sophomore and the student movement had started. I had been struggling with this issue of segregation and discrimination, about somebody being able to tell you that you couldn't buy ice cream here, and even though your money was supposed to be as good as anybody else's. So one day it was announced that there was going to be a meeting of the students to talk about starting a sit-in movement. And I went to that meeting. It was in September 1960. And some of the people at that meeting had names that you would recognize. Otis Moss had just graduated from Morehouse College, and he was a student at the Divinity School. Marion Wright, now Marion Wright Edelman, was a student at Spelman. She was a sophomore. She would go on to become the first Black to pass the bar in Mississippi, and she would go on to become head of the Children's Defense Fund. And throughout her life, I would say probably the strongest advocate for children in Washington that we've had. Marion Wright Edelman. Lonnie King, who had played football at Morehouse, but also was a leader in trying to change Atlanta. It was that group that I decided to join in the student movement in 1960. So, as you can imagine, I went to jail at least 5 times, went to prison because, and this was when I was a sophomore, because we had decided that we were going to fill the jails with students so they wouldn't have any other place to put us. And but when we filled the jails, they sent those of us who were, quote, leaders to prison. So that was my first experience with prison, going to prison because we had succeeded in filling the jail. Some of you probably even remember when Dr. King was arrested, and it was in this same movement. And Mrs. King called the Kennedys because later President Kennedy was running for president, and she was concerned because they had taken Dr. King out of the Atlanta jail and sent him to Athens. And it was not clear why, but Mrs. King was very concerned about that. And so President Kennedy called the mayor of Atlanta and asked him to let Dr. King out of jail. And he agreed because the Kennedys were running for president, and that would certainly help with the Black vote. But he got all of us out of jail. When Dr. King got out of jail, they let all of us out. And it was quite an experience. It was my only experience with prison as opposed to the regular jails. I'm only saying that to say this for me was sort of a background of what my life would be like, whether it was in medicine or whatever, taking on critical challenges and trying to make the best of everyone. When I was senior, I believe it was, in 1963, I was then one of the 2 leaders of the student movement in Atlanta. And I remember getting arrested and The person who got arrested with me was a Spelman student. And it was her idea, not mine. It was her idea that we should refuse to eat when we got to jail. Well, I stayed hungry most of the time, so that was not an easy decision for me. But we decided that we would not, we'd go on a hunger strike when we got to jail, and we did. And it got a lot of attention all over the country and the world because they were concerned about these students who were refusing to eat in jail and the fear that we would starve to death. But we didn't, of course. But students came out and they would demonstrate outside of the jail, and the Spelman students especially. But anyway, we got out, we survived that. It got too much publicity for Atlanta. The business community in Atlanta decided that Atlanta could not stand the bad publicity. So they finally let us out of jail. I'm only saying this to say that I've been fortunate. I mean, I could have stayed in prison, I could have stayed in jail. But one thing I did that I want students to certainly know, I always took my books with me to jail. And sometimes I came back and made one of the top grades on the tests because studying was a priority for me. And because I wanted to go to medical school, and I knew what that meant. So I studied. But I did want you to know that I made my decision a while ago to do something that Dr. King used to talk about. He said, and I'm sure you probably have heard him say it, that until a person finds something for which he or she is willing to die, then they're not fit to live. He believed that. He said it several times. That sometimes you have to decide that you're willing to give up one thing that's important to you in order to fight for something that is more important until you find that thing that's so important that you're willing to die for it. We deal with that now every day. I remember communicating with the director of the CDC during the time that Trump was sort of forcing the CDC to change recommendations and things like that. And I reminded him that sometimes you have to sacrifice. But for us, if you're at the CDC or if you're Surgeon General, what have you, the science should drive your decisions and your recommendation. And you should not compromise on that. And so you know the rest of that story, I'm sure. President Trump is not the easiest president to deal with. I certainly was fortunate, I think, to work for Bill Clinton and even for George W. Bush for a year. And I was fortunate because they were very reasonable people who respected science and they respected scientists. And therefore, when I presented to President Clinton the report of the CDC Commission on Tuskegee, which recommended that the president issue an apology on behalf of the nation for the Tuskegee study, he studied that report and he agreed that he had to do it. So on May 16, 1997, I believe it was, President Clinton in the East Room of the White House apologized on behalf of the nation for the Tuskegee study, in which about 400 Black men had been given the impression that they were being treated for syphilis, but they were being studied for the progressive syphilis within their bodies. If you haven't read it, I would recommend that you go back and read the Clinton apology for the Tuskegee study. I have photos right here in my office of that day. In fact, the night before, we had the survivors of the Tuskegee study to come to Washington and have dinner with President Clinton and Gore and myself. And then the next day was the official apology. The Tuskegee study was amazing. It's amazing that anybody, let alone people who are leaders in public health, would participate in something like that. But they did, and Of course, we can never forget that. But by the same token, we cannot allow it to lead us not to participate in something like an immunization program to prevent serious disease. And so when I was director of the CDC, uh, we we had to often return to that presidential apology and the promises in it when we talked about immunizing children before the age of 2. There's a lot I can say. I'll tell you one more story. As you can see, I love to tell stories. But when I was student at Case Western, I was on the MD and PhD program. So that means I worked part-time in the laboratory and part-time I did the same thing that other medical students do. Now, in part, I got into this because that was one way of paying my tuition. But it was after I had finished a part of my research course that I went to the hospital to work in OBGYN. There were 9 of us students on that rotation. I was the only black. And I will never forget the first day of that rotation because on that day, they took us into this room where there were 4 patients. They were all black. And we were to learn how to do pelvic exams on those patients. And there were no sheets to protect them or their dignity. And on that day, I made the decision that I was not going to participate. And when I said that, of course, the head of the rotation said that if I walked out on that rotation, he would see that I was put out of medical school and that I would never get into another medical school. That was quite a challenge. But I decided that I was not going to participate. It gets back to Dr. King's statement about until you find something that's important enough to you that you're willing to die, or let's say you're not going to die, but you're going to sacrifice something that's important to you. That was what led me to walk out on that rotation. I got a message the next day that I was to see the dean the next morning. And I don't have to tell you that I didn't sleep that night. But anyway, I did go to see the dean. The dean was Fred Robbins, and that's important because the 2 of us would have a relationship going forward. Fred Robbins, when I went to see him, had an interesting look on his face. He was sort of smiling. And he said to me, "David, it looks like you got yourself into some trouble over there yesterday." And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." He said, "Well, do you know what happened this morning?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well, the other students walked out and they said they agreed with you that it was inhumane to treat patients that way." And he said, "We're going to change that program. We're going to change it. It has to be a different kind of experience for students." A lot more I could say about that. The other students walked out the next morning, and if you read the book, you know that I questioned in the book whether I could have handled that situation better, whether I could have tried to get the students to walk out with me and put myself at less risk. But the fact of the matter is that I walked out, and the next morning, the other students walked out. And the only reason I question whether I could have handled it better is because this book is about leadership. And the question is, was that the best leadership? Or should I have talked with the other students about walking out with me before I walked out? But I was fortunate in that they came together the next day and decided that if it were inhumane for me to participate in a program like that, it was inhumane for them. And on that basis, they walked out too. I would never forget that. That wouldn't be the last time I had an encounter with Fred Robbins. Some of you already recognize the name Fred Robbins. He was one of the 3 people who won the Nobel Prize for the oral polio vaccine. One of the 3 people. But many years later, and I won't tell the whole story, but many years later, when I was president of Meharry, we ran into a very difficult situation. And basically, the accrediting body said that unless we could get some people on our board who were recognized universally as outstanding in academia, we were going to have trouble keeping our accreditation. And I struggled to try to figure out who can I get, and decided to call Fred Robbins without any idea of what he was going to say. And I asked him if he would consider joining the board at Meharry. And he agreed to join the board, served on the board for 12 years, including 2 years after I left. He continued to serve on that board. It's an amazing story. When he died, he would ask his family to have me speak at his memorial. But what Fred Robbins did, you know, in terms of my encounter with him around the patients and getting put out of school, and he took a stand. I didn't realize how important his stand was at the time. But later on, he would go further than that and become a part of the Meharry struggle, which represented so much of our story. In fact, your president, I guess, served as president of Meharry for a while, right? Yeah, after working at the Morehouse. Long stories here, a lot of stories, but these stories are important because they have a lot of historical significance, but also significance for today. I could go on for a long time. I want to make sure I don't talk too long, so that if there are a lot of questions, and I'm not sure how many there are, that I give you time to ask him. So why don't we sort of set aside some time for questions? I'll come back if there are not as many questions as I think there might be.
So, Dr. Satcher, we have Dr. Lewis and Dr. Stewart, and they plan to serve as the people who will ask questions in their moderation of this session. So I'm going to ask that Dr. Lewis start off the questions.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Satcher, for that very moving and stirring life story. It's amazing, sir, and we're honored that that has been your path and that you're here with us. I do have a question that for me, you know, your book is amazing. I know it's about health equity, but primarily about leadership as well. And I know that we have some folks who are tuned in today who haven't necessarily had a chance to get through your book. And I was wondering if it might be appropriate to ask you, sir.
I had trouble getting through it myself. No, it's
well, just in terms of time, I'm sure folks haven't had a chance to read through the whole thing, but I've had the good fortune of reading through the whole thing, and I was wondering if you might, sir, take just a brief moment. There are a couple of concepts in your book that are very important for folks related to the health side of things, and I was wondering if you might, in lay terms, distinguish the basic concepts of health disparity, health equality, health equity, and social determinants of health.
Well, it's interesting because the CDC, the NIH, WHO, all have definitions of health equity and the other things that you mentioned. So those are very important concepts. It's a very important question. Let me just start by saying I think health equity is the ultimate, right, in this discussion, because health equity goes beyond you know, a lot of other things that we can talk about, because it says that you have the opportunity to achieve optimal health, and all of the barriers to that must be overcome. You know, it's an amazing thing when you think about it. We deal with parents here at the Institute single parents in many cases, and they go through a program here learning about child development so that they can be optimal parents and they can provide their children with the best opportunity to grow and develop. Health equity is having the opportunity to make the best of your life and health. So it deals with all of the access to health care, quality of care, all of those things come together in the concept of health equity. I served on the World Health Organization's Commission on Social Determinants of Health. Very interesting. I was not that familiar with the concept, to tell you the truth, and I ended up traveling all over the world with WHO, looking at how different countries dealt with the quote social determinants of health, the conditions in which people are born, reared, grow, develop. Those are all social determinants of health. And they tend to be influenced by the amount of wealth that you have, amount of power. The social determinants of health are impacted by all of those things. Kind of community you live in. I mean, if you live in a community where there's no grocery store or none within walking distance, then that's a barrier to your health. And so the social determinants of health gets into all of those conditions that determine how healthy you can be. That's basically what it is. Those are the social determinants of health. I mean, I looked at that all over the world. In Brazil, where we dealt with teenagers who were in gangs and violence and all of that. And I never will forget that visit because they were angry. They were angry at life, but they were angry at us, even though we thought that, you know, we were there doing good work, and we were. And you know what turned them around? When they found out that I had been to jail with Dr. King. All of a sudden, the whole idea of nonviolence hit them. In other words, we can achieve nonviolently a lot of the things that we're fighting each other over. It was quite an experience. I never will forget it.
And I bet that gave you some street credibility as well with that group.
You're right. You got it. That's exactly right. That's right. It gave street credibility. I mean, they wanted to see themselves as people who were not afraid and who all of a sudden maybe could get some things accomplished nonviolently, that they had used violence in many cases against each other, you know, to try to make a point. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Stewart.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satcher, for your lecture. In your book, which I agree with everybody else is excellent, you talk about leaders as positive role models and leading by example at every step. In your career, from starting a free clinic in the basement of a church in the Watts area of Los Angeles, through 2 medical center presidencies, directorship of the CDC, and eventually Surgeon General of the United States. Given what you've seen in terms of the explosion of telemedicine and the educational tools that we've all used to help with remote learning during the pandemic, what opportunities do you see for transforming the educational programs that you talk about to improve community understanding of health issues like nutrition, obesity, reproductive health, et cetera?
So, really excellent question. And it sort of ties this whole concept of social determinants of health in terms of where and how people live and the opportunities they have to be healthy. Not everybody has an opportunity to be healthy because they live in communities that are violent. They live in communities where there's not easy access to healthy foods and safe places to be active. I'm concerned about Black kids who can't find a safe park to play in, so they end up playing in areas where it's dangerous. Um, I talked to the Gen Youth Foundation this morning. Gen Youth Foundation is a foundation which I helped to start soon after I left the position of Surgeon General. And I left that foundation almost 10 years ago, and they've continued, and they asked me to come back and talk about um, things that we needed to do to help children develop safely. So I was back there this morning virtually. It's amazing the things you can do virtually that we used to have to travel long distances to do. So this pandemic is bad enough, but it's not all bad. Um, there are people who can participate in things who didn't before, because doing it virtually provides an added opportunity. But anyway, um, I think we've had an opportunity to, with COVID-19, we've had an opportunity to see the other side of things. Now, I wouldn't go back and say that I will ever appreciate the fact that there are such great disparities in health. We have to eliminate disparities in health, and that was one of the goals of Healthy People 2010, and it was one of two goals. The other goal had to do with improving the quality of life of people as they age. So it was about aging and the quality of life. But that first pronounced, I believe it was 2000, and it was a part of. It continues to be a part of every goal, every statement of health goals that we put forward. It's an important goal. Now, I may not have answered your question because I have this habit of getting involved in my answers sometimes to the point that, so let me know.
Well, let me rephrase it again. So if you were imagining national programs that were aimed at educating people through some of the tools that we've developed, that you could do now that we're in along the lines of a television show, we have the ability to do all sorts of things. Where do you see this maybe going, and where might you start if you were actually deciding on these things?
Well, that's a great question. Sure, the question is better than what's going to be my answer, but I like the concept of really putting together a program. Let me first say one thing that we're doing here at the Satcher Health Leadership Institute, which is related to, I think, your question. When we started this program in 2006, after I had served for 2 years as interim president of Morehouse School of Medicine, I didn't come here to be president. I had decided that I didn't want to be president anymore. I had been president in Meharry for almost 12 years, and I had been head of Drew before I left. But what we decided, of course, was that we could intervene and make a difference in the lives of parents, and so we had a quality parenting program as one of our first programs.
Right.
We worked with parents. Many of these were single parents. Which, we felt that we could probably contribute as much or more, to those families where a single parent was trying to make it on her own, usually her. And so for several years, we did that. And that program, along with several others, are still going in different forms. So I think when it comes to the quality of life of children, and the role of parents, we have something we can contribute. We really can help to make parenting more effective. We can support parents, but we also can support communities, and especially we can attack the social determinants of health, because social determinants of health are impacted by resources, by education, by the conditions in which people live and work. That's where we can intervene, and that's where we should be intervening more. It's a great place for government to intervene. Um,
Thank you.
but I do want to add one thing because nobody may ask me about this later, and I don't want to forget it. Um, when I see what's happening now between the White House, if you will, and the CDC and others, it makes me very sad because I had the opportunity to work with presidents who respected science and scientists. Clinton, smart guy, really brilliant guy, but he respected science and scientists. George W. Bush, whom I served my last year with, I don't know if you're aware of it, but George W. Bush is responsible for the funding of the programs in Africa to treat AIDS. So where we are with AIDS today, we wouldn't be if it were not for George W. Bush, who nobody gives credit for being liberal. I mean,
Yeah.
he has a conservative front, and he is conservative, but he cared about people dying of AIDS in Africa. And so the PEPFAR program that involved over $80 billion was started by George Bush. Then Obama came and continued to support for the same program. Um, but I think about that and the difference it makes to have good leadership, as opposed to leadership that's trying to get in front of the press at every chance, trying to do everything for himself but not really thinking about how I can contribute to the health of people generally. So it's not the party that really has impressed me. It's been the fact that individuals like Bill Clinton, Obama, George W. Bush cared about people.
Yeah.
And they did what was best, and they respected science and scientists.
Mm.
They were great to work with.
Dr. Lewis?
So, Dr. Satcher, I have since we asked some students to give us questions, I'd like to ask two questions, one from a student, if I could, sir.
Please.
This question is from a public health student on our campus, and the question reads, at the age of 6, you had a mission to fight for health equity, which has been the driving force behind your career path and leadership roles. Seeing the many health disparities that still exist today, what are some ways that we can still fight to change this narrative to ensure your mission is fulfilled?
Wow, what a great question. But it's our mission, though. It's really our mission when you think about it, not just mine. And I think, number one, I think we have to invest more in children. I talked about the program here at the Satcher Health Leadership Institute, in which we have parents, some of them teenage parents, single parents, but they're able to spend 12 weeks with us, learning about child development, how the brain develops, learning about the importance of nutrition and physical activity. And it's been quite an experience for us because it changes the way people feel about themselves. You know, not just about their role as parents, but how they feel about themselves. I have to tell you this story, and I'm getting to that age now where I sometimes get lost in stories. But, but after it was announced that I was going to be retiring, and it's been announced a few times, and some people say I haven't retired yet, but I'm headed in that direction. But anyway, my staff said that the students, and these were mostly young parents, many of them single parents, had requested that I do their quote commencement address. I mean, they take this program very seriously, and they really look forward to their graduation. So I was there that night. I gave the address, and I was passing out certificates. And somebody from my staff whispered in my ear and said, "Dr. Satcher, you know that next lady?" I said, "What about her?" He said, "Well, she's in labor." I said, "In labor?" "Yeah, she's in labor right now." I mean, I was shocked. I mean, and I said, "Well, who's going to deliver her? And they said, no, I guess you're going to have to. They weren't just pulling my leg, but that was part of it. And so, but anyway, she came on through the line, got her certificate. She actually didn't deliver until the next morning. But they got a kick out of my being nervous about perhaps having to deliver this lady. I'm saying that to say that for them, getting that certificate was as important as any degree I've ever gotten. You know, it was important to them that they could have a certificate that said, I went through a program to help me be a better parent. That was basically what it said. We've learned a lot from these mostly young people.
Right.
And now, of course, we have a partnership with the Tuskegee Academy. Some of you remember the Tuskegee Airmen. There's an academy, you know, school near here named for that. And so every student there has a tutor from the Morehouse School of Medicine, every one of them. So we don't just stop with the parents. We also continue to try to be supportive of the students and, you know, as they go through school. We've got to invest more in helping students to be successful at an early age. Got to invest more.
Absolutely.
More time, more energy, more funding.
And my second question, sir, thank you for that wonderful answer, is I loved your point in your book about refusing to hate, that it seems you learned from A.D. King, brother of Martin Luther King, from your jail experience in the civil rights movement. So my question is, what ideas do you have on how we could translate that message today of refusing to hate to target to young people, to target that message to so many young people today who've embraced hate? And there are some young people who have embraced hate. Is there a way we can take that message of refusing to hate to really get some of those folks who are embracing hate to kind of back off of that?
Yeah, and your point is a good one. We were getting ready to leave jail. It was when the Kennedys had called the mayor of Atlanta, and we were headed out of the prison. And A.D. King said, why don't we ask them to let, there was a white guy who had been spraying us when we were there in the restaurant, and they had called the police, and he was spraying us. And so when the police came, they had no choice, and this was Atlanta. They had to arrest him too. His name was Sprayberry, by the way. This man who was spraying us had the name of Sprayberry. But anyway, he was taken to prison. Obviously, it was segregated, so we never saw Sprayberry anymore. And when the Kennedys called the mayor of Atlanta and we were headed out of prison, it was A.D. King, Dr. King's brother, who was one of the leaders of this movement then, who said, let's ask them to let Sprayberry out too. And as you said, he is the one at that time who quoted his brother in saying, you tell us again what he said.
Well, I think the message was refusing to hate. The idea is, you know, nonviolence is important. So we can't, if we're going to be truly about nonviolence, then we obviously have to refuse to hate. We can't embrace hate at all.
Right. He said it very well, just as you did. He said, nonviolence is just not about refusing to hit. It's about refusing to hate.
Right.
And because his brother has said that many times in his sermons, I think. So it was quite an experience.
So do you think there's a way we can move that same message to today's times in 2020? Because you know there's so many young people today in some of these groups that really do propagate hate.
Yeah, hate ultimately destroys the hater. You know,
Right.
and I believe that. And what A.D. King was saying on that day when he asked us to stop and asked the prison warden to let Sprayberry out, he was saying that that hate ultimately destroys the hater, and if we're about love, we should treat even Sprayberry that way.
And didn't Sprayberry become a supporter of the civil rights movement after that act of kindness?
Not as much as he said he was going to do, but he did become a supporter. He he made a statement that day that from now on he was going to become a leader in fighting against discrimination.
Right.
And of course, it was not too long after that that I left and went to medical school. In fact, there's a restaurant named Sprayberry. So I was in that area one day and I went by and I wanted to find out if anybody knew Sprayberry, whom I had gone to prison with. And nobody would respond when I asked that question. They sort of all walked away. So I don't know what that means, but I haven't seen Sprayberry since that day we got out of prison.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Good day, Dr. Satcher. I have a question from one of our viewers. The question says, thank you, Dr. Satcher, from a larger scale. In your own experience, what progress that has been made in regards to health equity as it relates to maternal death disparities? And the second question that the person had was, have there been any progress on implicit bias?
Say the last part again.
Has there been any progress on implicit bias?
Well, part of that I probably can't answer, but let me see if I can answer the other part of it. I think we've made progress as a society because I do remember when somebody could refuse to sell you an ice cream cone because you were black, and they didn't use the word black. I can also say that one of the biggest challenges we face now is that we don't own enough. We don't own enough restaurants and and stores that sell ice cream and stuff like that. We need to be making money, and if we don't start to making money and starting our own business, and not that I know that some people are doing that, it's critical that there'd be more because these children must be supported in their development, and that means that the resources ought to be there to help people promote things and sell things. Atlanta has come a long ways, but still there are not enough black ownership business, even though Atlanta probably is one of the top cities in the country with great leadership. We still have a ways to go. We as a people need to own more, need to control more, and I hope that's the direction we're headed in. I'm in my office at the Morehouse School of Medicine. Your president, I believe, went to school here. Across the street is Spelman College, right across the street, where my daughter and my first wife graduated from college. Right down the street is Morehouse College, where I went to college, where I first went to jail. So this is right here together, this conglomerate of institutions where the whole idea of what it means to be equal, what it means to contribute is very important. I owe a lot to Morehouse College. I owe, the fact that I was able to go through college, and even though I never really had the money to pay my tuition, they, allowed me to work, and ultimately I got a job in the biology laboratory where I did my first research. It was the first time I'd ever done any research, but they made it possible for me to do research and to teach other students. In fact, when I wrote this book, one of the people that I mentioned in here was Dr. Nottingham. Her name may have been Hawthorne then. She was a student at Spelman. She was 1 year behind me. But when I come back here years later, she's here teaching. And as you can see, she helped to write this book. She corrected a lot of things along the way. But it's amazing.
Okay. Dr. Stewart, anything further?
I do have one. I'm going to be selfish here and ask, so I'm the dean of the graduate school here. I wanted to get your perspective on how the the PhD part of your educational path impacted your personal or professional growth. If you'd comment on the value of the PhD for you.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. I learned a lot in the PhD part of my program. I I learned to think through problems, and I used to say to people in medical school, they they drew the line that we had to walk, but they drew it, and they said, "This is what you got to do. This is what." In graduate school, you had to draw the line and walk it too, because that was what the PhD was about. It was about coming up with concepts and ideas that then you had to use to solve a problem. I would trade nothing for the combined experience that I had with the MD and the PhD. I really was, and I think that way. I think like somebody is seeking to solve a problem. And it doesn't matter the nature of that problem. It's about solving problems that I've been about throughout my career, and using what I have learned about approaches for solving problems, and taking nothing for granted.
Before we continue, I would like to find out whether Dr. Salifu or Dr. Patu have any questions.
Well, yes, I have a broader question, and it's around the Office of the Surgeon General.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to know Dr. Satcher's perspective on the impact of the Surgeon General's office on the health of the United States. Do you think it is the same as when you were in the office? And could that office do more?
Well, the answer to your last question is yes, that office can do more. I think we've had different uh, kinds of surgeons general, and most people, when they think of the Surgeon General, they think of Lieutenant Terry, who released the first report on smoking and health, and it's believed that maybe 50 million lives have been saved because of people deciding to quit smoking. So that was a very important report. It's very difficult for me to compare different surgeons general because they worked for different presidents and they've dealt with different problems during their time. I mean, you could argue that Jocelyn Elders, who, quote, was fired, made one of the greatest contributions in the sense that she said, we ought to talk about sex and sexuality. We ought to talk to our kids about it. We ought to talk to the students in school. And she was fired, right? Because of the fact that she dared to talk about sex and sexuality. I've had a great experience with Jocelyn. When she received, who was it? It was University of Minnesota, who awarded a chair in sexuality to Jocelyn Elders, and they asked me to speak on that occasion. Then later, the University of Arkansas, where she went to medical school, decided to establish a chair in the name of Jocelyn Elders. And they asked me to speak at that occasion. Now, I was honored to speak because I have such high regard for Jocelyn Elders and the courage she showed as Surgeon General. It's not easy to compare because it depends on what you're dealing with. Clinton has often apologized for firing Jocelyn Elders, and Jocelyn Elders has made it clear to him that she understands fully why he fired her, and she didn't hold it against him. She said that, that she did what she went there to do, and that he probably did what he went there to do. So, but it depends on the president and the environment that you're working in. If you look at reports, of course, I probably released more reports that people are still using than anybody else but that's not the only measure of how good you are as Surgeon General. No, there's
Dr.
never been a
Petu?
Surgeon General's report on mental health before. There never,
That's
yeah.
right.
Well,
There-
actually, Dr. Satcher, as a psychiatrist, I wanted to just, again, highlight how important it is to hear your story, the way you've said, and thank you for both your leadership and your service, because that clearly has been an integral part of your life from the beginning. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
So I have one. Do we have any other student questions?
No,
No.
Okay,
no,
so
no.
let me ask you, Dr. Satcher. So you mentioned in your book the important role that faith plays in your life and has played. Can you speak to how you've been able to successfully integrate both faith and intellect, since those two are not always aspects that are compatible for folks? So how has that been a compatible relationship for you in terms of your faith and your intellect?
Oh, thank you. I can't believe how well you guys read this book. It's so unusual.
It's a good book, by the way.
It's a very good book, very good book, very engaging.
Amazing. I said that indeed because it's true. My parents were people of faith. My dad was superintendent of Sunday school for 25 years and deacon for 41 years. And my mother, of course, taught Sunday school. They were great people. They didn't have the traditional education beyond the 6th grade. My faith is very strong. I have been able to do things that, that I never would have expected, and maybe nobody else would have ever expected that I could do. But my faith has always said, yes, you can do it. Said, you may not have the money, but yes, you can do it. So that's been my experience and my faith. I don't judge other people. That's not a part of my faith. My faith is what I believe and what I hope for and what it leads me to do. Like walking out on a OBGYN service without knowing, whether I would ever be able to finish medical school. I just knew that it was the right thing to do. So that's how my faith affects me, because it leads me to make decisions based on, what I believe is right and not right.
Thank you, sir.
But my parents were people of great faith. And so when they came to my graduation at Case Western, I got my MD and PhD on the same day. It was the first time I know that my dad had been on an airplane. I think my mother had flown to Buffalo when my brother was ill there. But what I got from them at home, in the community, wherever, they were known for their faith. If somebody in the community needed something and we had it, you can bet we were going to be on the road taking it to them, whether that were vegetables or milk or what have you, because that's what they believed that you were supposed to share. So that's the way their faith operated.
Thank you, sir. Thanks again.
I have one last thing to say, if that's all right. And so there's Dr. Satcher, there's a popular line in a movie that I think applies to your remarkable career to this point. And there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And I think that you've had a remarkable life of championing so many causes that, you've made the world a much, much better place. And I'm glad to have had the chance to see you and hear you today. So thank you very much for that.
And I echo that sentiment.
It's quite a compliment, and I appreciate it.
So, as a psychologist, I want to also thank you so much, because your existence and your career had great impact on my career. I didn't even know you were at the University of Rochester at any point, because I was also there. So this is, it has been absolutely wonderful to hear the stories. We do have another question which we have to pass through our PIs before it goes to you, so that you may hear directly. And I just want to express just thankfulness for having had the opportunity to hear the stories, because in fact, stories often communicate the whole breadth of what we've all had to deal with much better than the text.
Yes.
You should know that we purchase books so that people have read them, and and our deans know about doing homework, so they did cover them.
Okay.
Um, and again, we thank you. Uh, Dr. Salafu and Patu, do you have anything else you'd like to share?
I think this program has been very successful. I think the message, is phenomenal, is outstanding. Our goal is really to motivate the young ones and, people who are in line to future careers to hear the real stories. This story is so powerful. I hope that it sinks and that people would use it to move their careers forward. I also hope that we would not lose track of the social justice issues around us and the health equity issues around us, and then keep fighting towards an equitable health system in the United States and maybe the world. I think that, the kinds of examples that Dr. Satcher gave are exactly what, people should be thinking about, that it's not impossible to actually achieve the health equity, but it's going to be incremental. It's not going to be 100% from day one. It's going to be incremental. So every single drop makes a difference. So everyone who is willing and able should contribute a drop, and hopefully we'll have many drops. We'll make an ocean and we'll move forward. So with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Satcher and the audience and my co-PI, Dr. Patu, and the two deans who have made time to be with us today, and our program managers, Drs. Straker and Pamela D. Straker, and then Lakia Maxwell for coordinating everything. And it's such a joy to see Dr. Satcher after all this long career looking so well. And we wish him well for many more years to come.
Dr. Salafu and I were together not too long ago, weren't we?
Yes, in the program.
Virtually.
Yes. That's correct. That's correct.
Right.
Can I make one final comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So Dr. Satcher, years ago, a little confession, but I've always exercised quite a lot over the course of my life. I started that habit as a young teen. But one of the things that really, really made an impact on me was when you were Surgeon General. And I said, look at this Black male Surgeon General, MD, PhD, and also as an avid fitness buff, runs, keeps himself in great shape. And I wanted to know, do you still do that? I assume you still exercise on a regular basis.
Oh, I sure do. I'm not as fast as I used to be.
Well, a lot wiser.
Seriously, I ran the Marine Corps Marathon when I was Surgeon General. I was 61 years old.
Right.
But I completed the Marine Corps Marathon, which was 26.3 miles.
Right.
But it was the training for it that was important. It was not just the race itself. It was all the things you do to get ready for it. It changes your life.
Yes, sir.
In fact, Dr. Fauci he would be coming to the laboratory on his bike. Tony always rode a bike, and I would be headed down that trail. As part of my training, I'd run all the way down to the Potomac River. And so Tony and I go way back in terms of physical activity. Right. And we're both about 80 years old. I think Tony may already be 80, but I'll be there soon.
Right. Well, it's so important because as healthcare providers, so often we always preach about what you have to do, but I think it's very important to actually embody that as well in terms of.
No, I agree. That's a great point. Yeah. And we need to get our children started. Some people think, it's only if you're an athlete that you should be physically active, but everybody should have a program of physical activity and good nutrition.
Right. Sorry about that little last minute.
That's all right. I survived it.
Just so everyone is aware, we will be showing this particular um, program again. We did have some technical issues throughout, but the program is fully captured and we will be showing it again. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Satcher.
Thank you.
Thank you.